everybody. Welcome to the Equity Guru video podcast. I'm Chris Parry. As usual, I'm talking to Ian Paterson from Plurilock. PLUR is the ticker symbol there. And we've talked a couple of times, and you've talked to our friend Jody Vance. So I would imagine that your story is pretty well understood by a lot of our readers. But I think looking at your share price, there's a little fall off in the last couple of months. What do you attribute that to? Is it that people are waiting for a magic catalyst, or is it something a little bit more base?
Well, so first of all, Chris, great to be back. Thanks for having us. I think there's a couple things going on. I think the first thing is, one of the key events earlier this year was that we made an acquisition called Aurora, and we purchased them March 31st, April 1st, and so. That's a company based in LA. Last year, they did approximately $28 million in revenue, 140 top-tier customers, federal, state, local level, and commercial. So just tremendous distribution for us, and that's why we completed the acquisition. But a lot of the the sales that we expected to go through that channel is not reflected yet in the financials, and so that won't be until Q2s come out. And so I think if you were to look at the press releases that we're putting out, we've announced, I believe the total now is just over $3 million worth of orders, just that we've announced. And so those aren't actually going to show up in the financials until the end of Q2.
Okay. Okay, so I guess that looking at that, those revenues are about to be booked. You're about to get financials that are a lot healthier than they have been. Not that they've been bad, but the upward mobility is important. Certainly, there are comparable firms in your sector that have a really excessive valuation. Look at something like Palantir, a $45 billion market cap. Obviously a lot of stress on their share price, trying to justify that. You're in the $25 million range, if I got that right. So you're about to book $28 million in revenues?
Well, I think what I was articulating was that last year, just the Aurora acquisition itself did 28 million. And so
Right.
If you're looking on a 12-month trailing basis,
you've added essentially your market cap to your market cap, or to your enterprise worth. Like, it's a pretty sizable jump. So I would imagine there's going to be some volatility there in the share price, maybe in an upward way. Without that, just by itself, if I'm going through your news releases, the thing that really jumps out to me in comparison to a lot of companies is the amount of digits that your news release headlines involve. $400,000, $210,000, $120,000, $190,000, $146,000. Like, it's just cash after cash after cash. And all of these are, generally speaking, government agency contracts, which means you don't have to chase the money. The money gets paid when it's due. And when you're through that gate, there's a lot more potential there.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. And if we step back, right, and said, well, what were Plurilock's objectives originally? So we went public last fall, right, just around 9 months or so ago. And what we stated was we have a dual growth strategy that we intend to grow organically. And so we made some hires in our sales team earlier in the spring, and we reported that. We also intended to grow through acquisition. And so we've successfully completed both of those two objectives. We've grown the sales team, we've completed one acquisition. And specifically in regards to the M&A, we wanted to find opportunities to accelerate sales by buying distribution to end customers. Aurora in particular, you're absolutely right. I mean, they have top tier customers. U.S. federal government, both on the civilian side as well as the defense side, state government, so they're in California, which is the largest U.S. state economy. And then as well on the commercial side, they've got great clients there. And so we've successfully been executing against the things that we said we were going to do. And I think ultimately Plurilock, which we started was ultimately a recurring revenue software company. And so, a lot of times building up that client base of recurring revenue software contracts takes time. I mean, there's not really any way around it, but you can accelerate that. And our strategy is to accelerate that by growing both organically as well as buying distribution and then seeking to cross-sell the products through that distribution. And so you're absolutely correct. The quality of customers that we have acquired through Aurora are just phenomenal. And so I'm really happy with the team's performance so far. And I mean, frankly, we've just been heads down executing.
really, you're at the I guess the clients that you're bringing in are what I think most companies in your industry would consider to be phase three clients. You know, the kind of clients that you'd work up to. You know, you might go out there and do business with a local school board system or an insurance company. You
Sure.
guys are just going to SOCOM and working your way downwards, which is a unique thing. But if it's possible, if it's doable, then you know obviously it's the way to go. Does this the level of contracts that you're bringing in, are they making it easier working down the system?
Well, I think actually even before we listed, we were working extensively with the U.S. federal government, and we were very public about our work with U.S. Department of Homeland Security. Going into the RTO process, and then even completing that, we've been announcing that. I don't think it hurts that we have some just exceptional people, both at the board level, but then also on our board of advisors. So again, retired Vice Admiral Mike McConnell, former director of the NSA and also the director of national intelligence, who's our lead independent director on the board. Also, earlier this year, we added retired Vice Admiral Jan Tai, who also has extensive NSA experience, and then she was the fleet commander for 10th Fleet, which is part of U.S. Cyber Command. And so currently, she's a full board member at Goldman Sachs and a few other financial institutions. And so, I think we were very careful to go as high as possible starting out, because we believed that if we could win with the hardest, most discerning customers, then everything else should be easy in comparison. That was really the strategy. And so I think to your point, the fact that we were able to do those really difficult things earlier on has made the rest of it easier. And frankly, when we get to that school board, to your point, or to that insurance company, those really help. Being able to point to both the people associated with the company, but also the past performance that we've had with working with and delivering solutions for some of those customers really sets us apart from another Canadian cybersecurity company.
Sure. So, normally, I guess, in my experience, companies that are in the defense or aerospace industries that want to contribute, a bolt to a new stealth fighter have to go through so many levels of security check and expose everything they do and all how they do it to a multitude of processes and security background checks, to the point where it can become almost impossible to get through unless you are squeaky clean. So, with that in mind, like, how much work do you need to do inwards to ensure on a regular basis that you have the best processes, that there's nothing that anyone can look at your company and say, well, you cut a corner there?
Well, part of actually being public helps in that regard, because there's a higher level of transparency that a public company has versus a private company that maybe does not. So ironically, actually being public, even at an earlier stage, helps us a little bit and provide more comfort to those customers, to those institutions. One of the things, though, is that part of the investment necessary on our side is that we have to have all the same levels of control and internal processes that the larger companies do, in terms of internal certification, internal compliance, both on the financial basis, but then also on the technology side. So, we've been working towards a number of certifications for the actual technology itself, and we talked a little bit to some of that in a recent corporate update that we put out earlier in the week. But you're absolutely right. I mean, we have to effectively behave like we're a larger company, even though we're smaller, because ultimately the customers that we're going to are much more discerning. Now, keep in mind that's both a feature and a bug, right? In the sense that it's harder, it's a larger lift to get there initially, but then once you get there, it almost serves as a competitive barrier, because any other company that wants to then follow us has to go through the same thing. And so, yeah, it's expensive and it's time consuming, and it takes a lot of internal resources to go and get SOC 2 compliance or to get other forms of compliance. But ultimately, it's just building up the credibility and the capability and the moat that we have against other vendors. And so ultimately, that's why we're doing it, is because we believe it will increase shareholder value, allow us to sell to additional customers or sell more to additional customers. And that's why we're doing it.
I guess, to paraphrase Kennedy, you're doing it not because it's easy, but because it's hard.
Exactly. Absolutely.
I guess, when you're in a space that is, the Canadian tech space is one that doesn't have near as mature a shareholder base as the US. Do you find any difficulties in coming out of Canada in that way, or does not actually being entrenched in the US open things up to you in the longer term?
It's a very interesting question. I would actually say that the level of support we've seen from Canadian shareholders has actually been extremely positive in the sense that it may not be institutions because we don't have as many small cap institutions as in the States, but the individual shareholders that we have been extremely helpful. And so some of those individuals have opened doors that I wouldn't have even thought to ask for. And so from that perspective, I'm extremely happy with the people that we have associated with the company, very supportive shareholder base, very collaborative, and ultimately are trying to help us build a tremendous company. What I would say is that Canada it almost has the best of both worlds because we're seen to be a trusted partner of many nations, and it's quite often that whereas maybe a Russian or a Chinese cybersecurity company might be viewed with more suspicion, a Canadian company is seen to be a little bit more trusted as compared to some of those other nations that are potentially on opposing sides geopolitically to the US, Five Eye or NATO countries. And so I do think that there's a benefit to where we are based and the fact that we have strong Canadian ties. We've also supplemented that. So Aurora is a defense contractor. They're based in LA. They're US citizens. They already have a bunch of experience selling to the US federal government. And so we're adding to that, but I don't think it was I don't think it was a negative coming out of the gate at all.
Okay. So, for those that I guess are less aware of what Plurilock is, I guess we should have given them a little bit of background, but in a nutshell, you're monitoring computer usage patterns to ensure that if somebody's got through a base login, that, if they've left their computer, gone to the restroom, that someone hasn't come along and taken over or managed to crack a password, how they use their mouse, how many tabs they have open, typing patterns. I won't go into much more beyond that, but it's a really interesting technology, and it makes perfect sense to me as somebody who's been on computers since my Apple II clone in the mid '80s. The number of times I've figured out that my password's been hacked, or the number of hoops I have to go through to log into an account that I haven't been on for a while. It generally seems to be almost performance based, like you're going through the performance of an ID check rather than an actual effective ID check.
Right.
Do you find that when you're explaining the technology to a potential client that there's that moment of like, I totally get what you're getting at, like really quickly?
I think that there is, and I think what you're articulating is the difference between a Me Too product versus a category creation product.
Right.
So if we take a step back here for a second, so Plurilock is actually two divisions right now. We have a solutions division, which is Aurora that we acquired, and they're selling products and services to end customers to solve a wide array of problems. And that's great for us because it means that they have a great breadth of clients, which we can then use to introduce our technology division. Our technology division is really in the business of rethinking authentication from the ground up. Traditionally, authentication is you proving yourself to the computer that I am Ian, and here's how you can tell that I'm Ian because I'm going to type a secret that only you and the computer, in theory, knows. Now, the other ways that you can do that is you can have something that you know, like a password or a PIN. You can have something that you have, like a credit card or a debit card or a token, or something that you are. And so something that you are traditionally has been a fingerprint or facial recognition or some static biometric feature. What Plurilock is doing is we're saying, look, all of those things are great, but all of those things haven't really improved very much since the 1960s. Passwords have kind of been around in the same variation. Maybe you log in using your phone, maybe you swipe your thumbprint, but generally speaking, these have all been very small, incremental improvements. If we equate this to a house, right, what we're talking about is the deadbolt on your front door. Yeah, you can have stronger steel. Yeah, you can have, a key with serrations on different plates, but like at the end of the day, these are just small incremental improvements. Plurilock is actually rethinking authentication paradigms. And what we're saying is, look, even if you check at the beginning of the day that you're the right person, how does the business, how does the corporation know that you're still the same person later in that day or at night, later in the week? And so what we want to do is we're continuously authenticating people throughout the workday. Okay, so let's go back to that house analogy. So what we're saying is, yeah, we can help you with front door, or you can use somebody else's front door deadbolt. Doesn't matter to us. After you get into the house, Plurilock is the motion sensor to make sure that it's actually Chris and not Ian who's actually in the house. And can we either lock or unlock any additional doors in that house? Because we know, because the motion sensor knows that it's actually Ian in the house. So we're completely changing how to think about authentication. Now, to your question, is that interesting? Is that exciting? Is that are we finding people receptive to that message? And the answer absolutely is yes. And the reason being, when we talk to customers, I've had one person tell me that passwords are considered to be nuclear waste. There's a mandatory evil, but there's so much risk with them because they can be stolen and they can be hacked and they can be circumvented. And so the industry really is looking for some new way of securing accounts because the traditional ways just aren't working. Two other points. First point, if you recall the Colonial Pipeline attack from just a few weeks ago, there was huge news because they got taken down by ransomware. Well, what was recently reported is that the way the attackers got in was a stolen password. So literally the bad guys stole somebody's password, or they found the password, or in any case, the password was compromised. They used that to gain initial access. Once they had that initial access, then they were able to do their nefarious deeds. Potentially they stole data, we're not really sure, but they definitely encrypted it with ransomware and then used that to get some money out of the company. So you think about that level of damage, it started with one stolen password, and you can understand why chief information security officers are looking for a solution. Now, the second point that I'll add is Plurilock is it's a new category of software. So if we were in the business of creating a password plus or some, variation on passwords, they're a little bit more secure, maybe you have to jump up and down twice in order to get access to the thing, that is actually an easier sale because I'm taking an existing product category and I'm saying, look, we're a better mousetrap, we're a better version of that. That's not what Plurilock is doing. What Plurilock is doing is saying, look, this entire industry no longer makes sense. And we know that because we've had more data, more records breached in 2020 than the last 15 years combined. What Plurilock is doing is something completely different. And the industry is going to take a bit of time to catch up. So hopefully that helps educate the listeners, Chris.
Yeah, like every time I put my thumbprint on my phone as a means of identifying myself, it kind of pisses me off because I know that thumbprint record is going somewhere that I don't want it to.
Sure.
And that the next time I try and use my fingerprint as ID, who knows if that's now compromised, right? If I use my facial recognition, who knows if my girlfriend is going to open my phone by putting it in front of my face when I'm asleep. Like
right.
There's all sorts of things that are designed to give us a little bit of security with the most possible convenience rather than the most possible security with the most possible convenience, right?
Right.
So I see what you're doing as being perhaps one of the first places where you're trying to actually get the best of both worlds rather than compromising one to give the other. I think it's kind of funny that I think when Tesla decided to build a car, they didn't take the latest Ford F-150 and say let's add to it. They said, what would we build if we built a car today from scratch with no preconceptions as to how it was done? And I kind of see what you're doing with network security as being similar. Instead of just sort of adding a capture to a fingerprint and saying how many traffic signs are in these 9 squares, it's like, let's take everything off the table. And how would we justify, how would we acknowledge that someone is who they say they are without getting in their way, without making them jump over a hurdle, without making them dance a 2-step? Like, as they're doing their thing, how can we be checking while they're not even paying attention? And that, I think, is the Tesla build, right? It's the next iteration of how these things can happen. My question for you would be, can you scale that to 1 billion people without having to send 100 million techies out to various offices to set things up?
Well, I think part of the benefit of using AI and machine learning is that in a lot of cases, there's inherent automation in the things that you do. So that's kind of an oblique statement. But I mean, broadly speaking, when we roll out our software, we do that en masse, whether you're going to enroll 1 computer or 10 computers or 1,000 computers, it's actually the same operation because there's no human configuration that you need to do on each of those devices. You just push out the software and then the system starts to learn automatically in the background. Now you may want to stage that. You may want to, if you know that there's one department that has more risk, maybe you want to start there and then kind of, go through typical deployment methodologies. But we're not.
You don't have to put Janice from accounting through a training session.
Exactly. And that's part of the benefit of using AI in the background, is that you get those inherent economies of scale, even if scale happens to be just Janet and her colleague to start.
Got it. So that's a great thing in terms of your potential share growth is, we're watching you execute on the order side. You've got the technology locked down. I assume it's developed to where you want it to be. And so now I guess the focus of the company becomes executing on the sales side.
Well, you're absolutely correct. And I think to your point, as a technology company, you're never really done. And so we are going to continue reinvesting back into that technology. We filed 3 additional patents earlier this spring, provisional patents for, again, fleshing out that competitive moat, lest there be somebody else that comes up behind us. But for us, it's really just being heads down, talking to customers, solving those customer problems. And we know that if we zero in on being customer obsessed, if that becomes our North Star, everything else falls into place.
I like to always ask a client company a prickly question, just so if people out there aren't feeling like they're just being sold.
Sure.
And so my prickly question for you would be: is there anything that you could have done better over the last year? You think? Is there anything that either yourself or your team or your company where you think, if we had our time over, we would have done it a little differently?
I think maybe the ordering of how we've gone about some of these activities we could have changed around, but frankly, Chris, I'm really happy with where we are today, and I judge that on the basis of the people that we have around us, the mission that we're executing on, because my belief is that if you get those things right, you're going to end up in the right place. And are there more people that we want to add? Absolutely. We're never done on the hiring front, but I know that what we're focused on is helping organizations defend against threats. They need a lot of help. We believe that we have technology that can help them, and ultimately that's a noble purpose. That's something that we are excited about and are proud of, in the sense that we're ultimately helping these companies achieve something that, literally keeps board members and executives up at night, which is, what do I do if I get hacked?
Right. I guess when a pipeline company gets compromised and ends up paying $5 million ransom, or notices a big drop in value because of the threat that's been effectively achieved, it must make it a lot easier for you to go and say, "Here's what we cost," and it's a lot less than the downside if you go about things the way you've been going them.
I think that's true. I think certainly organizations that have already experienced a problem or had a near peer or competitor experience a problem, they're always more, it hits close to home, literally hits close to home. And so, sure, they're more receptive at that point. But I think that the tide seems to be changing a little bit, in the sense that a couple of years ago, the large scale cyber attacks were more focused on government institutions and healthcare, and we didn't see as much publicized around some of the other industries, particularly industries that haven't been as advanced on the digital transformation journey. I think now what people are realizing is that it doesn't actually matter what industry you're in. Even if you're in pharma, right? If you're in the agricultural sector, if you're in the mining sector,
Health.
You are just as susceptible, right? I mean, we closed our first pharma customer just a couple of weeks ago. They bought both our Adapt and our Defend product because the statistic is that 1 out of 10 pharma companies is going to be targeted by bad actors. And so, I think that industries are starting to realize we're all at risk.
I mean, anecdotally, have you had any onboarding with clients where, once the system is underway, they realize that, the call is coming from inside the house, that they've already been compromised?
I don't think that that's necessarily realization. I think most companies have a pretty good qualitative sense about like, hey, if there's something suspicious, we know that it's here. Was that originating from somebody actually in the company, or was that originating from somebody who accessed an account from inside the company? I think actually what that speaks to is a realization that whether it starts from inside or whether it starts from outside, you can't trust anybody. I mean, that's why President Biden's recent executive order, right after the Colonial Pipeline attack, called out zero trust, which is this framework of thinking about networks in the sense where you should not trust anybody.
Right.
Because even if it starts from, a stolen password from the outside, they can get access internally, and therefore you can't look at anybody and just because they're an employee, assume that they're both who they say they are, but also, just doing their job.
But we're just a common old vanilla grade financial media website, and when I look at the security logs every day, it's just like probe after probe after probe. There's
Sure.
It's not even people, it's just scripts running, trying to hit every WordPress site to see if there's a vulnerability. And for a small operation like ours, it's a concern. If we were dealing with, 1 million patient records or credit card numbers of everyone that's ordered KFC, like the potential wreckage for taking it too easy is in the millions, billions. So I think you're on something that is, you're on trend. You're doing good in the world, which not every company can say. You've got a lot of room for growth. All you got to do to execute that is to just keep being what you are and grabbing a little market share when you find acquisition opportunities. Like, to me, this is a very de-risked opportunity that you've got here, and has been since you've gone public. Really, you had a lot of your ducks in a row coming out the gate. The share chart for me indicates not weakness in the company, but opportunity on the buying side. So I want to congratulate you on what you've built so far. I love that when I asked you if there's anything that you regret, that it wasn't oh no, we're doing it great, or some, I guess I tried too hard answer. You like really thought about it, which is a good sign. And look, in the markets, you're surrounded by guys that are fly by night, just by nature of the beast. And every time we talk, I'm impressed with the fact that you're building something, I think, that's going to be around in 25 years, and it's going to be the standard of the way we do things. So keep it up, man.
I appreciate it. Thanks, Chris.
We'll talk soon.